Hello, my name is Eric Segan, and I am one of the pastors at the Village Church. The following podcast is a ministry of the Village Church. We hope that it inspires you, that it draws you closer to Jesus, and it opens your eyes to the possibilities of living in the kingdom. Enjoy, and God bless.
All right. Thank you, Bob, for starting that tradition, or whoever continuing that. Welcome to the summer, guys. I feel like this weekend, Tucson, Arizona, just said, welcome to the next, 4 to 5 months of your life. Here we are. Yay. But while we're all hot and while many of us are escaping to different spaces in the United States and the world, literally, people at the Village are either going to Europe or some other space in the United States to escape the heat. We're here, and we're in Ruth, and the book of Ruth is in the Old Testament, and it comes between Joshua and Judges is when it takes place, and probably early in the time of the Judges, when everything is kind of crazy. So let me just give you a little reminder about the story of Ruth. It's about Ruth and her mother-in-law, Naomi, and it opens up that there's a famine, and the whole family, Naomi and Elimelech, they head out with the kids to go to the place of Moab to get some food and to hang out there for a little while. Things don't go well. Dad dies, kids die, and Naomi is left with two daughter-in-laws. One stays, and Ruth decides to go with Naomi back to Bethlehem because they hear there is food. And so they're headed back. And Naomi, if you remember, we left her off. She's not in a great place. She's changed her name to Bitter, and she's not very happy. So there's a few things that I would like you to remember from chapter 1 as we head into chapter 2. So last week we talked about the idea of reading the Old Testament in particular, but Ruth in this kind of context of honor and shame versus maybe more of our Western world's way of thinking of innocent and guilty or right and wrong, and more thinking about the story being told based on social capital, where you fit within the cultural hierarchy and how much your words and your life matter, so to speak. So we chatted a little bit about that. You'll see that show up a little bit in chapter 2. The other theme that we run into over and over again in Ruth is God's provision. It says it directly. It says God had provided for Israel food after the famine. So provision is this theme that we're going to hit on directly, but it's also stated indirectly and in the subtext that God provides, and just at the way Naomi narrates her life. And as I said, the thing we want to remember as we head into chapter 2 of Ruth is that Naomi ends the chapter, or we end with her being bitter. She changed her name to Mara, and this is because she left Bethlehem with a husband and kids, and then she's coming back with a daughter-in-law and no kids and no husband. And so she's bitter, and she narrates her life as God has done this to her. He's the one who's made these things happen. So with that, we're going to head into Ruth chapter 2. So let's just take a moment and pray. Father in heaven, thank you for today. Thank you for the heat. Thank you for this community. And I just ask as we wrestle with your text, as we enjoy it, as we study it, that you would give us new insight. You would remind us of why we are followers of you. That you would give us courage in the places that we are afraid. And I ask all of that in your holy name, Jesus. Amen. So, this is not to say that my sermon is terrible, but I am going to say this, in that I spent 5 days or 4 days, felt like 5 days, with 50 kids. And what I've learned, and this is just like kind of I see you teachers, is that when you spend that much time, I only spent 1 week, when you spend that much time with them, they take part of your brain. It just gets taken from you, and you don't get it back until a few weeks later. And so some of my brain is taken. And so the main theme of Ruth chapter 2, or at least the setting, is around this idea of gleaning. And gleaning is to collect leftover grain or produce after a harvest. And this is usually, the people doing this are the foreigners and the poor. And there is a law in the Old Testament that God handed out to take care of the poor and the foreigner. And here's what's in Leviticus 19:9. It's also found in Deuteronomy. It says, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edge of your field or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. I always love that gets put at the end of things. I am the Lord. I mean this. So here's why I'm talking about gleaning. A, it's the setting. And B, when you glean, you've got to bend over and you've got to grab things. And I did a lot of bending over and grabbing things while helping children. And that's kind of how I felt about doing this sermon. Is where my brain was. We're just going to kind of glean things from Ruth chapter 2. And hopefully we'll walk away with a sense of maybe something that God's inviting us into in this story. So, here's the first idea I would like you to wrestle with as we read the first section of Ruth chapter 2. Need calls us to risk. Need calls us to risk. So, I do not like asking for help. And I think most people do not like asking for help. But what I have found is that the older I get, the things that I think I'm competent in, really the less I know. So I've been married 28 years, and really I think I know less about being married now in some ways. There are other ways I don't than I did when I first got married. And partly that is that when I first got married, I didn't realize how much need I had, like where I just wasn't competent in things and needed to ask for help. And that was actually hard for me. And in so many different areas of my life, asking for help has been hard because showing weakness is just something I don't like. It's vulnerable. And I don't know, maybe there's even something in our culture that says you shouldn't do that. Not being strong is a bad thing. You kind of go down in the social capital. But what I want you to think about as we just read this first part of Ruth is, if risk is asking for help, where do you have need in your life? Are there places where you are resisting asking for help? Because the more aware of your need, the more likely you need to ask for help, you need to risk. So, we find our two people, Naomi and Ruth, in a place where probably they're trying to figure out how to get food. So we pick up our story in chapter 2. Now, Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Now, a couple things I want you to just take note of. One, they are in need. But the author, if you remember, this is got like 85 to 88 verses. I forget the number exactly, but it's in the 80s. So every word matters. And so we're reminded in chapter 2, and we're going to be reminded over and over again, that Ruth is a Moabite. And Moabites aren't good, right? We need to be reminded of that, and it's actually important for this chapter. So she's taking a risk, because it's not just a single woman going out and gleaning. It's a single woman who does not belong to the people with whom she is gleaning. So there is a risk there. What's cool about this little section is this little phrase, "as it turned out." In the Hebrew, it says chance for chance. She so chanced upon a chance. The narrator is winking at us and saying, hey, there's this great guy named Boaz, and we'll address him in a second. And somehow she ended up in his field. What the narrator is saying is God's provision placed her there. by chance, she ended up in Boaz's field. So she took a risk. And so I want to go back to that question as we just think about gleaning some of this. Where is God asking you to risk? So I want to shift this a little bit. It's not just that you have a need, but is there places where God is asking you to step into things that you're afraid of? Or is there places where God is just saying, hey, you think you're competent in this place, but you are not, and you need to ask for help? The Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 12:9, and talking about his own struggles, says this, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me." As followers of Jesus, part of being a follower is being willing, I would argue, to ask for help. And asking for help is actually boasting in your weakness. It is saying you are not competent. And the message that you and I are given over and over again in this society is you must be competent. You must know what you are doing. That doesn't mean you don't practice and you don't train, but we are broken human beings walking in a broken world, and we are people who are in deep need, and there is so much about us where we need help. Let me just give you a few examples over my life just to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. So I don't know how many of you guys remember before Indeed, when you had to go get a job, you had to go walk to every store or, whatever place, shop, and get an application. And you use this thing called a pen. And you wrote your name, and then you had to call people, not on your cell phone. You had to go home and get your cordless phone and call people and see if they would be, a reference for you. Well, that terrified me as a 16 or 17-year-old to ask shop owners and, grocery store owners and to get the application. And for a long time, I just couldn't figure out how I was going to do it. And I finally figured out. I went to my friend who I talked about last week, and I said to him, "This scares me. Will you do it with me?" And since he had no care about what people thought about him, we went everywhere, and he asked for applications, and I got them. Right? That's one example of me just saying, I'm weak and I can't do this. The more recent one is that Jill Sommitz, over the last couple of years, has just been pounding me over and over, "Eric, you got to write this book. You got to write this book about the hot seat model. You got to do it. You got to do it." And I'm like, And I've tried a million times, and it hasn't worked. And so I actually told Mark, I was like, "Mark, I need to actually do the outline as a sermon series." And we messed around with some other stuff, Michael and I actually, and Mark, and that didn't work because it was going to be the hot seat, or people on the Old Testament characters on the hot seat, and that it didn't really work for me to write a book. So I had to be vulnerable to all of you and say, look, I don't know how to do this, so I got to teach it, and then I was able to write it, but now I have 6 chapters written, and I have to hand it to my wife and say, I'm really not a great writer. And every time she's going to edit it, and every time I try to talk to her about editing it, she just shakes her head and says, "Oh, okay." And I'm like, "Oh, no." But it's vulnerable to ask for help. And there's so many others. What I've realized is that I don't know everything about parenting. I don't know everything about marriage. I don't know everything about being a pastor. And it's really helpful to ask for help. And in fact, it embodies this passage when we're able to say, this part of me is strong, this part of me is weak, and this is, Jesus showing forth happens when I'm willing to ask for help. And that is exactly what Ruth did. So we're going to make this little bit of shift. And we're going to shift into sort of what I would call the beginnings of a romance. So there is some romantic stuff going on in the subtext. But the characters, both Ruth and Boaz, who are presented to us, are examples of gratitude and kindness. And I think when gratitude and kindness are expressed, they reveal a lot about who you are. This morning I was talking about how much I enjoy when children will come up to me and just say, "Thank you for doing this," or, hey, is there anything I can do to help? Because I know I'm like, oh, their parents have trained them. It's revealing some character about. But then after I talked about this morning, and there was a bunch of new people this morning, but this little kid, like I held the door open for him, and he looked me straight in the eyes, and he paused and he said, "Thank you." And I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Like it revealed something about the softness, because then I watched him run off with his friends, and he was just so kind. I'm like, "Oh wow, that boy has a particular kind of character." And he's expressed our kindness, and when it's expressed, and gratitude when it's expressed, are revealing about who we are. And we kind of figure that out as we read along in this story. Now, I put the heart there to remind you that there is a romance going on, and maybe we could pick up on it a little bit. All right, so we got a lot of text to go through, but let's just walk through it. Starting in verse 4. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." Harvest. You see, this looks like a play, and they're all like, "The Lord bless you." Maybe they sing it. They answered. Okay, so Boaz comes in, and his name means with strength. And in Solomon's temple, one of the pillars is actually called the pillar of Boaz, the pillar of strength. It's with strength. So the with strength comes in, and it's obvious that he's a man of godly character, and he's blessing his harvesters. And then he sees a woman. Now, this could be romantic. Maybe she catches his eye. I suspect he is very aware of the people he's taking care of, and he sees this woman in his field, and he's like, I don't know her. So he says, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, this is kind of funny, "She is the Moabite who came from Moab." Right, okay, with Naomi. She said, "Please let me glean," and gathered among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. This is really detailed. I'm like, okay, so she's a Moabite. Don't forget that, because those Moabites, they're lazy, but not like she's not. In fact, she asked permission. And on top of that, she's a hard worker. She works really hard, and she only had a short break for a drink. So immediately, we've got Boaz on the scene. He's a man of strength, man of God. We have Ruth. She's polite, she's hardworking, and she's not like a Moabite. Okay? That's what I think we should glean from that. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." So remember, what is it that the narrator calls her? Ruth the Moabite. What does Boaz call her? My daughter. Like that just like the first, I've read Ruth a lot, but the first time I kind of went through it, it catches me, and I get a little choked up, because I'm like, he's acting like Jesus, but he just changed her identity in one little word, right? He calls her the same thing Naomi actually calls her, my daughter, not the Moabite woman, right? And then on top of that, he acknowledges the danger with which she is in. And he says, look, you are safe as long as you stay in my field. I told the men to leave you alone. So it's not just, again, a single woman, it's a Moabite woman, easily taken advantage of. And so he changes her identity and offers her a safe place. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground, and she asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done, and may you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." So she immediately bows down and says, hey, like, why are you doing this for me? Why are you being so kind? I am, and she doesn't say it, I am a Moabite. I'm a foreigner. I'm the least of the least. Right? So if you remember this honor, shame kind of society, she's on the bottom of the rung. He's on the top. And he says, no, you have been acting in an honorable way. And you left your family, you left everyone, and you are taking care of my kin, Naomi. And I have heard about it. And I read one commentator who said he's heard about it because she is the gossip of the town. Right? She's it. Like, we got to remember, Bethlehem is not Tucson. There isn't like 500,000 people around. Everybody knows who Ruth is. And he's like, I've heard about you. And you have come to take refuge here. And I would argue that he says in this last part that I have highlighted in the yellow, he basically is saying, and I am going to be the instrument of your refuge. I'm going to be the instrument of your protection. You can hide under my wings. So, then the text takes a weird change. So she's been working hard. He talked to her. And then it says, at mealtime, Boaz said to her, and in the English it feels a little harsh, come over here and have some bread and dip it in the wine and vinegar. But this is basically an Old Testament date. And so he has her come sit down, and she does. And when she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, let her gather among the sheaves, and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. Now, he seems to be going a little bit overboard, because he's basically saying, like, look, like, it's not just you're gathering the extra stuff. There are sheaves, so there's a bunch of, wheat and barley wrapped up. So grab that, and then the men are going to pull out some stalks, and when they look at you, they'll be like, oh. And then she'll grab it, and she'll carry that. So it turns out to be about 30 to 40 pounds. If you don't understand what 30 to 40 pounds is, think about 3 to 4 Costco survival buckets that she's carrying home with her. I don't know how she's doing this. I think she's got some guns. So she works hard in the field. So she heads home. I think we can't, the thing that I just want you to catch on to is that though there are wonderful good things to learn from this text, it's also just a kind, lovely, ancient romance. He likes her, I think. I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into the text there. Maybe but we'll just go with it anyway. So, with that said, we're just going to make a little left turn here, and let me ask you this question. How is your strength expressed? Because I think what we end up seeing is that Boaz's strength is expressed in kindness, right? He sees her, and he goes out of his way to protect her. But her strength is reflected in gratitude, right? And thankfulness. And his reasoning for it is because of how kind she has been to Naomi. And what we find is that these are two very other-centered people. Philippians 2:3, Paul says this, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself. Do not of yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interest of the others. And here's my thought. Kindness and gratitude are the two of the clearest ways strength shows up in God's kingdom. So let me go back to this. How is your strength expressed? Are you aware of your strength? We live in a culture where strength is valued. I said this in the morning service, and people asked me about it afterwards. I said, I am 6'2", 6'3", 260, and when I walk into a room, I can get what I want. My physical presence, my commanding voice, if I give it a certain tone, I can get what I want just because I'm a man and I'm white. And I have this. This is just true, and I've experienced this. And so part of me needs to be aware of that and how I impact people, and how I offer kindness and how I offer gratitude. But I wonder how do you offer strength? How is your strength expressed? Do people feel taken advantage by you? Are you do you badger people? Like, how do they experience you? Here is a good exercise that I would challenge you to do. You can do it with your close family or some friends. I would say, ask somebody, how do you experience me as a kind person? And what does that look like? Do you experience me as a gracious person? And what does that look like? How do you experience my strength? Like, am I intimidating to you? Are you afraid of me? Are you afraid of what I'm going to say? Afraid of my sense of humor, etc.? How do people experience your strength? I think what's beautiful about these two characters is that they give us an example of what it looks like to express godly strength through gratitude and kindness. Now, one of the things I remembered when I was standing up here this morning was that in Romans chapter 1, when Paul is talking about just how society is spiraling, he gives a whole list of things that have happened, but one of those things, he says, is that people have stopped being gracious, or they have no gratitude for what God has done. Right? When you and I stop having gratitude, when we stop being gracious people, and we stop thanking God and those around us, we lose sight of who God is. But when we are kind, when we express our strength through kindness and gratitude, I think God will show up. Now, he's always showing up, but we will see him in a better and more clear light. So, Ruth chapter 2, verse 18 and 19. She's headed home. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what was left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz. Dun, 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 she said. And now, I just want you guys, do you remember at the end of chapter 1, Naomi was bitter. God has left me empty-handed, basically. All my honor is gone. And then she says, "The Lord bless him." Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "He," speaking of God, "has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers," or you may have heard it as kinsman redeemers. Then Ruth, and we go back to the narrator, Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's fields you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished. And she lived with her mother-in-law. So one of the things that I think is just been really challenging this time reading through Ruth for me is just how much she narrates her life with God being sovereign in everything. And when it's hard, God is involved in the hardness and intricately involved, and even maybe causing in her mind things. And when good things happen, guess what? God is involved. This challenged me to think about the way I tell my stories about what's happening in my life and how I understand God involved in it. The next thing, though, is that she says this man, Boaz, is the guardian redeemer. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because next week Susan will kind of tease this out in chapter 3 a little bit more for you. But in simple terms, when someone ends up in the place where Naomi is, the closest relative, usually of the husband, is required to take care of her. In If she's older and just taking care of her in her old age, if she's younger, actually providing her with sons or providing her with some kind of way of carrying on the name of her husband. He is to redeem her. And there's a lot behind that. What we just need to hold on to is at the end of each chapter, it seems that we're given just another little bit of hope, right? Another little bit of hope that Ruth and Naomi's life is going to change. So, I have another question for you to wrestle with as we glean a little bit more. Where has God already made provision in your life, and are you willing to remain there? Where has provision happened in your life? What is it that you have, and are you willing to remain in there? How has God moved in your life? I think if you're anything like me, you immediately start thinking, well, God's provided this tangible thing. He's provided this car, this house, my friends, church, finance, whatever it is, breakfast, He's provided. Like we start thinking about provision in very tangible ways in that sense. But I kind of want to reorient you a little bit. When I'm asking a question like this, I'm asking you this. In Colossians 2:6, Paul says, "So then you have received Christ Jesus as Lord. Continue to live your lives in Him, rooted and built up in Him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflowing with thankfulness." When I ask the question, where has God already made provision? Jesus is where God has already made provision in your life. Jesus' death, His resurrection, the life He gives us through that, the Spirit of God, the church, you, the community, like that's what you've been given. But for me, I would say to you, that's really hard to stay in. This morning, as I was journaling and trying to think through things, in the morning, I often will just go to a coffee shop and start journaling about the sermon and about what I'm wrestling with in it. And I just had to say, Jesus, like I don't think that's enough, oddly enough. Like I have a hard time staying anchored in death, resurrection, and coming renewal and the Spirit of God in me. Like I need something more. And I think part of it is I have a hard time trusting that God is intricately involved in everything and has a providential plan in my life. Right? I have a hard time with that. But not only that, I am truly, from down into the bone, an American. And I get dissatisfied with things really fast. Right? And Rod used to tease me a lot because he'd say, we'd go on vacation to Seattle a lot early on when we planted the village. And he's like, okay, Eric, you can't look at the job ads. Like, because I'm just like, I don't think I can continue to do this village thing. I need to move on. Right? And I think we do that. Like, we have a bad experience at a restaurant and we never go back. Like, we even if it was our best restaurant ever for a while, and we move on. We're just antsy people. It's really hard for us to just stay anchored. And it's hard for me, personally, maybe, I don't know, for you, to stay anchored in the provision of the God of the universe giving His life for me, raising from the dead, and promising to return and make all things new. Because the world is hard to be in. And I like to narrate Him out of it a lot. So, in closing, I just want to maybe rephrase a few things and then we'll talk a little bit. So first, God shows up in our need. And need, and I know I'm being really emphatic here, always invites risk. I think, yes, sometimes you need to learn how to do stuff on your own. But most of the time, it's just so hard for us to say, hey, I need help. So where is God inviting you to risk and ask for help? And then I would wrestle with, like, how is your strength expressed? How do people experience you? Do they experience you as a kind person, as a generous person, as someone who is gracious? Or are they intimidated, afraid, and don't feel safe around you? And Ruth, it's interesting. In the end of Ruth, both her mother in law and Boaz had to tell her, stay in the field. Like, this is the safe place. I think Ruth is she has a lot of ingenuity, it seems. And she's like, maybe there's this other field. Like, I got a lot at Boaz's place, but I bet you I could get more over there. And they're like, no, this is a safe. Stay. Where is God asking you to stay? Where is God providing? And are you willing to stay there? What might it look like to stay in the simple provision of Christ's life, death, and resurrection? Well, that was my gleaning with half a brain. I would love to hear if you have questions, thoughts, redirects.
So I have two things I was thinking about. One has to do with your strength, like are you kind, are you generous? And I think it's really great to think about. But also to remember sometimes you can't compare yourself to people who have real gifts in those areas.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So like and I know you know that, but I just wanted to put it out there that like if people are intimidated by you and don't feel safe around you, it might be because you're tall and you're big, and that's not because you're not kind and generous.
Right.
And so, you can also, with the help of your community, evaluate. Maybe you might have a personality where you just don't think of that stuff. But you might also, like, sometimes I think the qualities of kind of blowing past social graces can also be really important in leaders and entrepreneurs. But you need to be thinking about submitting what you have to God and keeping those things in mind.
Yeah.
But anyway, the other thing was, what in the whole gleaning, like, don't glean to the edges of your field. So I think about that. What is that? How do we do that in modern day? Like, we don't lock down our Wi-Fi so people can, Anyway,
but you
that's my thought.
only don't lock it down. You have an hour. It's open
An hour,
to
it's open.
everyone, and
No,
then it locks
but I'm
down.
serious. Like, where do we have that opportunity?
It's really interesting. I'm sitting in a coffee shop yesterday, and there are three men, and they are probably 10 years older than me. And they're having a conversation, and the one guy's like, I was talking to this guy, and the guy said, hey, can you help me out? I'm struggling with my finances, and I just can't get ahead. And so I sat down and looked at his finances, and can you believe this? He was giving $600 a month to the church. Why do people do that? And he was really baffled, and I didn't know them well enough to be like, hey, I know. But I do think I'm not saying I'll give to the church, but the generosity of God's people, like not holding on, is our way of not gleaning to the end of our fields. Is saying, you know what, this is actually, the world doesn't do this. The world doesn't give our money away. Like they hold on to it. So I think that's one way. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes, I feel like it goes back to Rod's, it's not my car, it's God's car kind of thing. It's like not my house, it's God's house. Like those kinds of things would be some ways of doing that. Anybody else? Thoughts? Ron?
To me, risk means risking it all. When I really risk, I risk everything.
Yeah.
Now I go to the table and throw down my whole year's salary on 00.
Yeah.
And I'm either going to make it or I'm going to lose it. And that's really scary. And I mean, I've risked everything in my life before, and it was really scary.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out, how to mitigate the risks and how to, but it just takes going for it, it seems like.
Yeah, I would agree. I think God does invite us to go for it. Though I also would just challenge you to like go all in on asking people for help too. If you're gonna,
Yep.
you just go all in that way too.
That's difficult too.
Yeah. Yes, it is very difficult. Yeah. Thank you, Ron. Anyone else? Thoughts? Jessica in the back.
Hello. I've just been thinking. I think Emily. I don't know. Either you asked or Emily asked. Like, what is your field? Where is God telling you to stay? And it's so. I'm sure other people have felt like this. Moms. Like it's so tempting to just be like, you know what? I'm gonna go get a job, and not be at home with my kids because that might be easier in a lot of ways. And I think one of the things that I had to do constantly as a mom who decided to stay home more with her kids than work is to not leave the house as much as I would like to for a job. And but that's like a continuous thing. Like it's just always, there's a lot of temptation to like not stay in the field and go just to leave and move on. But yeah, I think right now that's one of my fields that I need to stay in.
Yeah.
And I think I know because I'm like, oh, that's the one that like, stings a little bit. When it's like, oh, I can stay and do this, I can stay and do that. But when I think of like staying home with my kids, it's like that's the one that I feel like I'm being called right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think that part of being able to, in a sense, boast in your weakness is being able to say, yeah, this is hard. That it's hard. Acknowledging it. Yeah. That's good. Anybody else? Thoughts? Mr. Seepin?
Eric, I just had a question. The gentleman who was talking about his Christian friend, right? How did that impact you? I mean, what went on inside of you?
Well, it was interesting.
I was just curious.
Well, there are these three guys, and they're at the restaurant or the coffee shop I go to a lot. And funny thing is, like, I'm very drawn to them, and so I had my headphones on like one ear, so I was just half hearing their conversation. But today, so I'll just tell you, I like to go to Le Buzz and have a cup of coffee, the one over on Grant and Fort Lowell, and where I sit, they have an obnoxious timer, and it goes off, and it's like dee dee dee. It's just so annoying, and so it happened today because that's where I was journaling, drinking my coffee, and the guy who was talking about people giving money to church and not understanding it turned and said, "You know about this, right?" And we started having a conversation. So I feel like God might just be moving me into that relationship with that. So there you go. I don't know how he do it. He sees me there. We give each other the nod, like that. Anyway, so there you go. That's just, yet they do know I'm a pastor. Yes. Yeah. That's the end of the story. I was just intrigued by this guy. He's a contractor, and he's very interesting.
I'm over here in the corner.
Hi.
I was thinking about the gleaning of the edge currently, like what it looks like in our lives. And I think that some of it has to do with our time, because we're really good at consuming time. We tend to get really busy with our own stuff, our own family's stuff, and then our own rest and entertainment. And we can fill all of our time without actually leaving some time around the edges to like maybe be hospitable to somebody new who shows up somewhere. Or, somebody that you just found out came in from out of town and you run into them at Trader Joe's and you could have them over for dinner, or you could go out to coffee, or just or somebody who needs help, and you could make space for it. So time comes to mind for me.
I like that. Thank you. Bob. Yeah. He needs his steps.
Yeah, but we're of one mind. I was going to talk about time also, because I could waste. I mean, I'm retired. I could waste all my time just watching sports, reading the comics in the paper. So yeah, I think that's a place. I think you spoke to me here to not go all the way to the edges with my time. So.
Thanks, Bob. Jim.
So a long time ago at a place far, far away, I studied economics. And so I can't help thinking about, just often thinking about the New Testament through that kind of lens. And the thing that I think gets in our way for this gleaning idea is just this idea. Well, there's two things. One is this Milton Friedman idea that your whole purpose in the universe is maximize shareholder values. Who cares about your employees, about your customers, or yourself? Just the shareholders. But even with that, but with everything else we do, and I do it so much, is we're always trying to be efficient. We're always trying to get a better deal. I go to this shop because they're going to test my machine, and then I go to Amazon because I'll get a better price and it'll get delivered quicker. And so a couple of the areas where I find I need to slow down and make things a little more gleanable, I think one thing we have kind of woven into American culture, I don't like it economically because I think it's just clunky, but tipping is a way that we leave some extra for someone else. Buying something, if it's not hurting our family or something, buying something where, okay, that money's going to stay in the community. It's going to hire some people who are working and serving. Consuming some services and things like that, not always going for the very best price on things. So I think that's a little way. It's kind of like that kind of guerrilla goodness where you just kind of randomly throw money and think, oh, aren't I cool? Like pay for the meal of the guy in back of you in line at the drive-through just to weird him out. But it's not necessarily the best or most efficient way. But I think some of these ways where we could maybe be a little less efficient in a way that makes life just a little easier on the people who work for us or provide services and things like that.
Thank you, Jim. I like that. It's good. Well, I'm going to pray. I don't think there's anybody else's hand. All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for your wisdom just poured out in this community, and I just am so thankful to be able to walk away tonight with good things to think about and to understand you and your graciousness towards us in a deeper way. So I ask that as we eat, and as we sing and as we celebrate your table, that we would be a people of kindness and of gratitude. And I ask that in your name, Jesus. Amen.